So we are beginning with the session now.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. A very good evening, everyone here in India, and a good morning to Professor Arvind Singhal back there in USA. I, Kulveent Rehan, on the behalf of USMC, welcome you all to the last session of Mediamorphosis, the lecture series on contemporary perspectives from media industry and academia. For this session, we have with us Professor Arvind Singhal from the University of Texas, United States of America. I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Singhal, to you all. He's a well-known name. He does not need any introduction though, but still, let me read out a couple. Professor Singhal is a Samuel Cherney and Edna Wolt Marson Endowed Professor of Communication and Director of Social Justice Initiative at the University of Texas, El Paso. He is also, with William J. Clinton, Distinguished Fellow at Clinton School of Public Service, Little Rock, Arkansas, and Distinguished Professor, Faculty of Business Administration in the University of Applied Science, Norway since 2015. He teaches and conducts research on diffusion of innovations, the positive deviance approach, organizing for social change, the entertainment education strategy, and liberating interactional structures. Professor Singhal has mammoth number of books to his credit. 14 books I can see here, and some of the notable ones are, of course, The Communication of Innovations, the very famous one, India's Communication Revolution, The Bullock Carts to Cybermarts, Positive Deviance, a new paradigm of social, organizational, and behavioral change which is in process, Inspiring Change and Saving Lives, the Positive Deviance Way, Health Communication in the 21st Century, Inviting Everyone, Healing Healthcare to Positive Deviance, Entertainment Education, a Communication Strategy for Social Change, to name a few. Professor Singhal was selected as Distinguished Anna Endowment Lecturer in 2017, the Distinguished Carol Arnold Lecturer at NCA in 2015, and recognized with the Elizabeth Andrecht 2014 Award for Outstanding Contributions to Communication Discipline by the Scripps College of Communication, Ohio University. The Social Science Research Council and International Communication Association ICA recognized him with the Communication Research as Collaborative Practice Award in 2009 and Communication Researcher as an Agent of Change Award in 2008. The list is very long. In NW Communication Association honored him with 2007 Human Rights Award for steadfast commitment to social justice, social change, and freedom. In the year 2005, USC Norman Lear Center recognized him with the first Everett M. Rogers Award for outstanding contributions to entertainment and education. Professor Singhal's recent academic honors and appointments include Presidential Scholar, Mudra Institute of Communication and Arts, India, President-appointed Visiting Fellow to Japan, Fulbright Hays Scholar, Slovakia, to name a few. Professor Singhal's research has been supported by numerous organizations like National Institute of Health, the National Science Foundation, the Dutch Health Research Council, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, to name a few. He's been an advisor to the World Bank, UNFAO, UNICEF, UNDP, UNAIDS, UNFPA, US Department of State, and the list is very, very long. Professor Singhal has taught at many universities, Ohio University, University of South California, University of California, Los Angeles. In fact, he's visited and lectured in close to 90 countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe, Australia, and North America. We are honored to have you here with us, sir, at USMC. Today, Professor Arvind Singhal will deliver a talk on transmedia storytelling, the power of narrative engagement. Over to you, Professor Singhal.
It's a great pleasure for me to connect with all of you. I'm going to see if I can bring my PowerPoint on. And can you see the screen? If you can, give me a thumbs up, Kulveen.
Yes, sir, I can see the screen. Please go ahead.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much for that very comprehensive introduction. I come to all of you with a deep sense of humility, because in some ways this path that I may have walked on has had a lot of co-travelers and a lot of people who have helped me along the way. I did want to point out this little logo that you see on the bottom left of the Positively Abundant Collaborative. And I'll provide the Facebook address one more time. I've just launched this recently along with a whole host of people, and all the publications that I talk about, including this presentation, will be on this Facebook group. So, you don't need to worry about taking notes, in my opinion. I would encourage you to just go with the flow. It is important that one begins with gratitude. And I'm putting a picture of me with my guru. I've had a lot of gurus, but this one in particular, Dr. Everett Rogers, who was my PhD advisor. And we had a long innings, as we say. So we worked together for 20 years. He was a collaborator, co-author, mentor, teacher, and especially in this journey of transmedia storytelling, from getting interested in entertainment education to transmedia. He was a seminal figure. Of course, he loved India, and it's important that as I connect with you, we extend our gratitude to him. Now, what I'll do is I've taken the liberty of infusing my personal narrative with this professional narrative of transmedia storytelling. And that is because, you cannot disassociate the person. And as you go through this journey, and of course, the journey is exemplified in some ways by the head full of hair that I had. I think this picture was about 30 years ago, and how much hair I have left now. But there have been, as I said, numerous milestones, several bumps, lots of collaborators. And I hope that this personal narrative will in some ways enhance the topic that we are discussing today, which is about narratives. So let's begin by asking, why narratives? Why storytelling? Why would I spend 35 or 40 years of my life being a student of storytelling? And from a social change perspective, and of course, you can bring in a literary perspective, you can bring in a critical perspective, you may take whatever perspective you want, but from a social change perspective, stories can take us to places we have never been. So, somebody rightly said that if you want to understand a culture, listen to the stories, because the stories will reflect the scripts. They will reflect the social norms. And if you want to change a culture, then you should change the stories. Unless that shift happens, it is unlikely. Unless people are telling new stories and listening to new stories, that shift is unlikely to happen. So stories can create new possibilities. They can create new language. You'll see I'll be talking about Charles Dickens a little, and I'll be talking about our very own Bapu, Mahatma Gandhi. And they were masters at creating new possibilities through new language and creating new scripts about how to overcome problems. The so-called monsters, social monsters, let's say, if you're interested in social change. I love this quote by G.K. Chesterton, British columnist, essayist, writer, who says, and this is, of course, he's talking about the power of fiction, the power of literature, the power of fairy tales, when he says, fairy tales are more than true. Not just because they tell us that dragons exist or monsters exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. So that's the notion of stories taking you to a place where you have not been before. And it points to the power of the pen. Now, to give you a very quick example, a few months ago, just before COVID-19, my last visit actually was to Hartford, Connecticut. And when I was there, I visited the home of Harriet Beecher Stowe, the person who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, whose house is right across from the home of Samuel Clemens, whom we know as Mark Twain. And of course, we know about Mark Twain writing The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And I remember in my days in India, as I read through these books, you didn't really think very much about them, except, of course, the title and the issues that they dealt with. But now I can talk about the importance of, let's say, Uncle Tom's Cabin. As Langston Hughes, whom you see here, who was a poet, a social activist, said, given this book was written in the 1850s, just before the American Civil War, that Uncle Tom's Cabin was the most cussed and discussed book of its time. And you can imagine it was cussed in the southern part of the US, slaveholding territory, and it was discussed a great deal in the northern part because it deals, as you can see from the cover, the story of a slave man and his relationship with a little girl. Now, Harriet Beecher Stowe was about 4 feet 11 inches tall. And when Lincoln became president and was presiding over the Civil War, 1861, Harriet Beecher Stowe visited him. And in her house, which I visited in Hartford, there is this little metallic sculpture. And when Lincoln greeted her, he said, so you're the little woman who wrote the book that started the Great War. And of course, the notion of the Great War was to have a more perfect union. So we cannot overemphasize through this story the importance of literature, the importance of stories, stories which make it possible for us to travel to places where we've not been. Now, let me give you a media example right off the bat. In the year 1999, so this was 21 years ago, I was invited to serve in an advisory capacity to this absolutely phenomenal mass media initiative in South Africa. Post-apartheid, they started a program called Soul City on TV, on radio. There were comic books, there were newspaper columns, there were cartoon strips. I mean, this was a multimedia initiative to use entertainment to address very difficult issues. And in this case, the monster or the problem that series 4 of Soul City, it's still running, but series 4 dealt with the issue of domestic violence. Now, why domestic violence? Because it's a public health issue of tremendous significance, though under the radar. Also because it happens in a space, the home, the domestic sphere, which we usually consider as being a place of safety and security. So it makes it very insidious. And of course, it has, tremendous impacts with respect to physical and emotional and psychological trauma. So Soul City decided, using a narrative approach, to address the issue of domestic violence. Now, for my collaborators in South Africa who did the research, to understand the existing scripts, the existing stories of domestic violence. Before this program was produced, there were three main stories from three different points of view. The existing story from the man's perspective, the abuser's perspective, was I am the captain of the ship. When I come into my home and when I close the door or shut the curtain, I can do whatever I want. And the man, of course, has heard this script from his parents and grandparents that only one bull can live in a kraal. I'm in charge. If she gets out of place, I'm going to put her back in her place. So that's the man's story. That's the man's script, the existing script. The woman's script, the one who's being abused, the victim, is a little bit different. Her script is, I, in the sanctity and safety of my own home, I am helpless. I am violated every day or every few days, and I want help, but I cannot seek it. In fact, our research showed that if a woman was being beaten, and of course it's very loud, they're broken bones, so they're physical marks, and if a neighbor came and knocked on the door, often it would be the woman who would say, oh, I'm fine, nothing's the matter, go away. And then you ask the question, why is that kind of a script enacted? Because the woman also has been socialized to keep her, life together, to keep her family together. So even though she wants to ask for help, she cannot ask it because you don't clean your dirty laundry in public. Or you don't display your dirty laundry in public. Now, the third dominant script, and this is where formative research is important because you can get a sense of the scripts, you can get a sense of the stories because of the neighbors. Now, the neighbors, again, know what's going on because it's loud. They see, a black and blue mark on a woman. They may ask what happened. And of course, she tells you that, oh, she hit her head on the door. So the neighbors know what's going on, but their script is not to intervene. And you may ask the question, why is that the case? Because they consider it as being a private matter between a husband and wife. So here are three scripts, three sets of stories which are interlocked and which are passed on intergenerationally. So how can a narrative serial on various media help unlock this script? So, the series began, the fourth series began, and you see this man who's a respected teacher. He's a good man, but, of course, he puts his woman in his place, and, the woman wants help but can't ask for it. The neighbors know what's happening, but they don't intervene. And so what happens is...
Professor Singhal, my apologies for the interruption. Some of the participants have just told me that they are not able to see one portion of the screen. So if you could just go back to share screen, share content button. If you could just close this.
All right.
If you could just close this presentation.
Close this presentation. Okay, closed.
Right. Go to the third button again, share content.
Go to the third button again.
There you have share file.
Just 1 second. Okay, don't worry. Okay. So stop sharing. Okay. And then go to share content.
Right, sir?
Yes.
Then kindly share the file. Not
share the file. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Where is it? It's on desktop. Okay, let me find it. All right. Continue. Okay.
Share the file.
Yeah, I'm doing that. It's loading. Must be a pretty big file. It's still loading.
Yeah,
So
looks like.
what was the problem? They couldn't see the entire screen, but they could see part of it?
Yeah, there was some check boxes on the, I think, right hand side of the screen. They were finding it disturbing, so they wrote to me.
Ah, acha. Okay, I see. Okay, well, this is still loading. So, you know what? If this doesn't work, this loading thing, we can, if the participants can bear with some boxes, and I'll send them the PowerPoint. But I don't know whether we want to spend too much
Yeah,
time trying to fix this.
right, sir. You can
But
continue to
it's
share
up
the
to you.
screen. You can continue to share the screen, no problem. We'll send the
All
presentation
right.
to them later.
Okay, now it's still loading, so I think I may be stuck here. Share content. Well, let me apologize to the audience members. I know you couldn't see this, but yeah, this is stuck here now.
So you can close the and share the screen.
True, true. I'm trying to do that. Just a sec. You want to continue? Cancel this loading. Okay, I'm canceling it. Okay, so now let's. One second. Are you all with me? You can.
We're all
Okay,
with you, sir.
all right. Do you see the file again?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, so my apologies to the participants, uh, you know, that they were not able to see the whole screen, and thank you uh, for bearing with it. Okay, so, all right, now why is it not moving? Yeah, so you could see the thing moving again? Yes? The boxes are not an issue, says Jason. Okay. All right. Okay. So why narratives? Fairy tales are more than true. The power of the pen, Uncle Tom's Cabin, the power of literature. So you're the little woman who wrote the book, which was discussed and cussed and started this great war. Soul City, domestic violence. So these three stories were stuck. Are you with me, all of you? I'm guessing you are. So I'll just go with the flow. And Kulveen, if there's something else that happens, please don't hesitate to stop me. Sometimes it's good to break the story, then we can pick it up. All right.
Right, sir.
So the three stories are stuck, right? You've got the man feeling he's in control, the woman feeling helpless, wanting help, can't ask for it. And you have the neighbors who want to help, but don't because the script is you don't interfere in a private matter, especially a private matter between husband and wife. So as this series unfolded, you basically see these scripts enact themselves. You see the man in control, the woman, helpless, wanting help, can't ask for it. The neighbors want to intervene, but they don't. and the story goes on in a stuck way. Until one day, the pen moves in a different direction. So the script writers, they take the story to a place, and then in a particular scene, on a particular day, when the cycle of violence is escalating, they show the following. When the man is about to beat his wife, the neighbors come out of their homes, not one, many, with their pots and pans, and they begin to beat their pots and pans. Now, you may ask the question, what has happened here? Is the man now still in his private space, feeling that he's in charge, or has the private become a little public? Is the woman still feeling that she's helpless, or is she now feeling that, well, there is help? And think about the neighbors. How has their script changed? Do they now feel that they are powerless, or do they feel that they have some efficacy? So what you're seeing here is on screen showing a new possibility, a new language for taking care of domestic violence, as embodied in the notion of pot banging. And of course, every home has a pot, and they make a lot of noise. And the pot speaks differently to the man, basically saying, we see you, stop. It speaks a little differently to the woman. We are here for you. And the neighbors get a sense of collective efficacy. Now, domestic violence is a social norm. It's a community norm. It's a community script. And so here what you are seeing is the community modeling a new norm, a new script. So it didn't surprise us when we did the research that we began to hear about people in different communities coming out together and banging their pots and pans. This behavior did not exist in the repertoire of South African society. And you can, of course, uniquely attribute the language of pot banging and the new behaviors of collective pot banging to the series. So it presents, from a research perspective, a uniquely attributable marker. You can see directly the effect of the program by virtue of how many people know about pot banging as a way of taking care of domestic abuse or as a practice. And many, of course, may know about it, may not have practiced it. Many may have known about it and may have practiced it. So very quickly, narratives can be theoretically turbocharged. And, I think there are lots of students on this call and lots of colleagues, and there's tremendous value in bringing theoretical sensibilities, narrative sensibilities, and theoretical sensibilities to this. So, the social cognitive, social learning, media modeling, social diffusion, and of course, theories of narrative persuasion and engagement. And let me just talk about two, to give you a sense of how this works. So here's a picture of Albert Bandura, who in the early 60s became very interested in how people learn new behaviors. And the operative word is new behaviors. And he was very interested in children and how children learned violent behaviors. And, you see behind him a picture of his very famous Bobo doll experiment. And the finding of the Bobo doll experiment was that children learn violent behaviors by watching role models. And the most important finding, in my opinion, of Albert Bandura and his Bobo doll experiments, that it did not matter whether the role model was a real person that the children observed, or it was a role model on television or on a film. Bandura found that people, or children in this case, could learn violent behaviors both by observing a person in real life, or they could observe a person on a film. And this gave rise to this whole movement of social modeling, of symbolic modeling. Because if you are the script writer, now the power is with you, because you can decide how the script will evolve. And that's the reason why the Soul City example is important, because we learn behaviors about domestic violence by observing what is around us. And here the media creates a possibility that didn't exist before. And that's the power of narrative engagement and narrative persuasion. Now, there's also this theoretical point when it comes to theories of narrative engagement. You know, we talk about theories of transportation, how people are transported into a different world. But many psychologists talk about this very unique phenomena that we know as parasocial interaction. And what is parasocial interaction? Especially if you have a series, one episode following the other, it's the interpersonal relationship that develops between an audience member and their favorite character. Good example of this is when my son was growing up. Even though he was raised in the US, he was very interested in cricket, and he would watch Sachin Tendulkar play. And when Sachin Tendulkar scored 100 and lifted his bat and then pointed it at the crowd, my son Ariman thought, of course, that Sachin was talking to him. And, he would cheer Sachin on, go Sachin, oh, all these emotions. And having a relationship with the sports character, but it doesn't have to be with the sports character. It is like welcoming your favorite actor into your bedroom or your living room every day at an appointed hour, because you need to have this ongoing relationship with them. So now a little bit of history. You'll be seeing that I'll jump around. And the story of mass-mediated narrative engagement begins in Victorian England. I think I saw my friend Maxine join this call. She's in the UK. So Maxine, the story is for you. So in Victorian England, as literacy rose and printing technology advanced, a new narrative paradigm emerged. And it changed how stories are produced and consumed. And you can think about your own episodes of binge watching Netflix or Prime Video, and you will see why what happened in Victorian England almost 185 years ago, you will begin to see some resonance. So here's Mr. Dickens, Charles Dickens, whom I will call the father of narrative engagement. And he was the guru of socialization, the guru of serialization, or rather socialization through serialization. Because what Dickens did, and I think we have to begin by saying that he's the most successful novelist of all times. His books have never been out of print. His contribution was that he offered his work in installments. So it began with Pickwick Papers in 1836. They were serialized over 180 chapters. So imagine getting a book, but in installments, and 180 installments once a week or once every 2 weeks. And Dickens actually owned this weekly journal called All the Year Round. So you can think about him as being the owner of Netflix. And of course, then he puts his content. And, so every week you get a few pages of the story. And he was a wonderful orator. I've actually been to his home in England. There's a lectern which he stood by, and he would orate and narrate these stories. And you can see, when you watch a favorite program of yours on TV or on Netflix, you go episode by episode. And imagine if you had to wait for the next episode for a week, no? And what that did was, of course, it's serialization of narrative fiction. And narrative engagement and fandom builds over time. What you see is that for a reader, it extends the temporal experience. It's over time. Also, a newspaper or a weekly costs far less than a book, which not too many people can afford. So it's at a low cost. And it fundamentally shifts our understanding of what is text, or intertextuality from one episode to the other. And of course, all these devices of rhythms, the ups and downs, the cliffhangers. And in many ways, it is our precursor to ratings and to our notion of binge watching. So of course, you could read Oliver Twist in many installments, or read David Copperfield in many installments. But then, of course, at the end of the serialization, you could buy the book, and that's your binge reading. Now, of course, I grew up in India reading Charles Dickens, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my tryst with narrative engagement. So while I was a student at the University of Delhi studying engineering, I was a regular at All India Radio between the years 1978 and 1983. 1983 is the year that I came to the US to get a master's degree. I was fluent in both Hindi and English. I had good mentors. I did a variety of programs. And I think what may have distinguished, and of course I got lucky, some of my programs, especially my Western music programs, was that I did a lot of research, spending time at the American Center, on Kasturba Gandhi Marg, British Council, Parliament Street. So if I was playing music of the Beatles, I would read up on the Beatles. And I wove in, you can say, a commentary about, whether it was the Moody Blues or the Beatles or Simon and Garfunkel or Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And those programs began to be, I'd say, light, as experienced by the fan mail that I was receiving. It was a pretty heady time. I was 17, 18, 19 years old with, again, a head full of hair. And I became immensely intrigued by the power of fandom, by the power of entertainment, and the role of research in bringing the entertainment content home. So much so that after my bachelor's degree in engineering, I came to the US to study at Bowling Green with Professor Srinivas Melkote. I was studying radio, television, and film production. And then I went for a doctoral degree to the University of Southern California with Professor Everett Rogers. And it was around this time in the mid-80s that the Hum Log project began in India. Hum Log was the first long-running television serial in India, had 156 episodes, phenomenal ratings. And the key was that it was a program that was designed to create a public discourse about difficult social issues. And so there's this image of Professor Rogers. You can see his hand in a jeep of the Council for Social Development, who were my partners. This research was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. At age 23, I was working with the likes of Dr. B.R. Patil, Mr. V.B. Singh, with Mr. Dr. K.S. Nair at the University of Pune, Professor Chitness. I mean, some of these names may be resonating with some of you, at least, in India. And I think I'm here with a research team. My colleague Bill Brown is there, and what I see on the board is my writing about how to plan the survey questionnaire in 3 locations. And in essence, I was very fortunate that Hum Log was playing in India at that time that I was just beginning my doctoral program, and I had a very supportive mentor who encouraged me to apply to the Rockefeller Foundation to study its effects. And then, of course, I was literally hooked. Very popular program. I became dear friends with Manohar Sham Joshi, who was the writer of the program, became very good friends with Abhinav Chaturvedi, Nanhe. Through Nanhe and Manohar Sham Joshi, I was able to get a sample of 20,000 viewer letters that were written to this program. So here you get authentic audience feedback pretty much in real time. Here's an image of me with Professor Rogers sorting out these 20,000 viewer letters, and my mother's, is wondering, this is in the basement of our family home, what is this American professor doing with these rat-infested or rat-dropping invested? But this in some ways shows us the joy of doing research. So you have a script, you have a program, and people respond to it. And Hum Log received 500,000 viewer letters. We only got a sample of 20,000. And now you become very interested in how are the audience members processing these narratives. And it was quite revealing the impact that this program was having on those who were watching it. And of course, the ones who were writing letters were clearly more engaged, perhaps a lot of parasocial interaction with the characters. This resulted in a book, which some of you may know. I wrote this in 1989. I was still a doctoral student, and a major chapter in this book was the Hum Log story. Now I'm going to do some leaps. In 1996, 1997, by this time I'm a professor. I obtained a grant from the David and Lucille Packard Foundation to do a study of this highly popular radio serial on All India Radio. It was designed by Mrs. Usha Basin, who's a sort of a genius at producing radio serials. She was trained at the BBC, knew about The Archers, which is a long-running radio program using fictional characters to talk about social issues. And Tinka Tinka Sukh, which basically stands for, happiness lies in small little things, was 104 episodes, highly popular, and 125,000 letters were written to All India Radio in response to this program. And I want to tell you a little bit about this particular letter. So this letter, unusual, it's about a meter long and about 3/4 of a meter wide, came from this village of Lutsan in Uttar Pradesh. And it included the signatures and thumbprints of 184 community members. And it basically said, and at the bottom, for those of you who can read Hindi, it says, Akashwani Delhi ka sarvashresht karyakram Tinka Tinka Sukh, from Delhi station of All India Radio. This is the best program ever. And in this particular letter, it was two-sided. On the other side, they talked about how the community had taken a pledge not to give or take dowry, that they were going to educate each and every girl child in their village. And so it really intrigued us that we did a community-centered case study. And so several researchers, including my friend and colleague Soumya Pant, and numerous others, spent time in Lutsan trying to understand what was happening. How come this level of narrative engagement? This wasn't typical, of course, of the general population, but it could give us some clues about what was happening at the community level. And so this is a little young girl. When we first visited Lutsan, she basically was taking care of her siblings. No, she wasn't going to school. She wanted to go to school. Her elder brothers went to school, but she didn't. 6 months later, when we revisited, she was sitting in the front row. And 6 months ago, only 10% of the elementary school's population in village Lutsan was girls, 90% were boys. 6 months later, there were almost 40% of young girls who were in school. And you ask, how did this happen? So basically, there was community listening, there were radio clubs, there were people who were orchestrating the ground-based listening of this program. And through this listening, the community made decisions that, their girls should also study. So a couple of mothers got together and decided that they would now take care of the younger siblings, sort of a creche, place where little babies could be taken care of, so that these young girls who were providing care could be in school. So what we learned about narrative persuasion from Lutzan was that you needed an engaging air cover, ground-based orchestration and group listening. And if that led to community-based conversations, which led to decisions and actions, and if you had progressive opinion leaders, new possibilities like a girl going to school could be realized. And this article was documented in the Journal of Communication, which is, as you know, our premier journal. And I'll post this article in that Facebook page, which I'll also list later. So here is me with my PhD advisor. This picture was taken in 1997 in Costa Rica. And what we are doing here is we are creating the outline of the entertainment education book, which then came out in 1999, which basically tried to codify and systematize the experience of narrative persuasion, including how to study them. It was published by Routledge, still in print. Very quickly, and again, you're seeing all these little nuggets. How does one apply the lessons that we learned from Tinka Tinka Suk? So the opportunity presented itself when a radio program, Taru, was broadcast in 4 Indian states, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, and Jharkhand. And it was a radio serial broadcast for 1 year. And we looked for a ground-based partner. And our ground-based partner was an organization called Janani. And of course, this lesson we had learned from Lutzan, and I played a sort of a small role in making sure that all these moving parts were in place before the soap went on the air. So we partnered with Janani. Janani had a network of 25,000 rural health provider couples. So not just the rural health provider, the man typically, but they also trained his wife in basic reproductive health care. And they had a network of 25,000 rural health clinics. Each clinic was branded, as you can see, with a little butterfly signal. And we partnered with Janani to promote Taru, the radio program, in advance of its broadcasts. So basically drumming up support and priming the audience, creating, you can say, the necessary ground that was needed so that from day one, when the serial began, there would be a big audience. The unique aspect about Janani was that each rural health provider marketed their own brands of contraceptive pills and condoms and pregnancy dipsticks and so on and so forth. So we could track, the uptake of this. We also did a lot of pre-broadcast orchestration in a sample of villages, which we were studying, highly primed villages, and using this, folk media orchestration. And here my friend Devin Sharma and again Soumya Pant were deeply involved. We set up Taru listening groups because we had learned from Lutzan, from the previous case, that listening groups are important. And most of these listening groups were of young women. And here you can see they won a little quiz contest, they got a little transistor, and group listening began to happen. And they were all given little diaries, which they maintained about what changes were happening in their lives. So here you can see we're talking about narrative persuasion, but also research. And, my own personal journey in terms of how you move from one step to the other. So this research was funded by PCI/Gates Foundation. It was carried out by our colleagues at the Center for Media Studies. I was fortunate again to know Dr. Bhaskara Rao, the founder, and also, of course, his daughter Vasanti, whom some of you may know. And just one case that I want to share from the Taru case, the notion of creation of new realities. So our formative research had shown that in rural remote Bihar, young girls did not have their birthdays celebrated. In fact, they didn't even know how old they were. And you can imagine that's because the norm is that, you value a male child. When a male child is born, you're blowing a conch shell, you're distributing sweets. But when a young girl is born, it's like, oh, now we've got to claim for a dowry. So what we did, we challenged the script writers to model a birthday celebration. And that happened. It was announced on radio, and a young girl's birthday was celebrated. And it didn't surprise us, as you look at these quasi-experiment results that we did, that in highly primed villages where, we did folk media, where we set up listening clubs, where we encouraged people to listen, listenership to Taru was 13 times higher than the general villages where we did no priming. And the sales of condoms, contraceptive pills, and pregnancy dipsticks in these highly primed villages over a 1-year period increased from 2 to 6 times. Most importantly for us, the number of girls' birthdays increased. And they increased because, now once you have a young girl who's celebrating her birthday in a village, much like the screen birthday, a birthday is a socially networked event. On the screen or on radio, you heard her birthday being celebrated. And as a birthday was being celebrated, there were other girls in this fictional story of Taru who were pulling on their mother's sari or their dad's shirt and saying, how about my birthday? And, and likewise with the audience members. So much like domestic violence, pot banging, this whole notion, this new reality of celebrating a girl's birthday. And when you celebrate a girl's birthday, you don't celebrate it alone. Again, you do it in a group, in a large group, in a village. And once a birthday celebration for one girl happens, it makes it possible for other girls to have their birthday. And you may say, well, what's the big deal with birthdays? But today, if she's saying, why not my birthday? Tomorrow, she's going to say, why am I not going to school? Or why am I not riding a bicycle? And so these are the kinds of changes that it's a slow process, but you see the value of narrative persuasion with ground-based orchestration. So anyway, we documented these books. As you'll see the name Everett Rogers here. This particular book, Pop Culture with a Purpose, is downloadable. I'll send you a link on that Facebook site. And now, let's do a little bit of a leap, a jump. So far I've talked about narratives for big screens and mass audiences, Soul City and Hamlog and Taru, mass ears in this case. And let's talk about this day and age, and let's talk about transmedia. That is narratives for small screens and fragmented audiences. And of course, there's a hybrid, and you see many hybrids. Now, why this? So here's an image. Talk about mass viewing. Everybody's watching their little small screens. So the notion of the consumer is very different. The internet, of course, puts the me in the medium. Me not just as a consumer, but me also as a producer and as a participant, as a generator of content. And, I decide what to watch here and when, which is very different from, the days of Hamlog or television-based or radio-based serialization. And hence, this notion of transmedia storytelling. And what is transmedia storytelling? Transmedia storytelling is a process where various narrative elements are strategically designed and implemented in a coordinated fashion across different communication platforms over time to create a coherent and compelling entertainment experience. And the idea here is that you have many stories and many stories on many platforms. None of the stories is repeated. It's not a linear story. The different stories on different platforms allows a consumer to have multiple entry points. And let me give you an example. Before that, if Dickens was the father of narrative engagement, I will call our own Bapu, Gandhi, the seer of transmediated campaigns. And you don't have to look very far. His Salt March, it was a multi-pronged viral campaign over time, at scale, allowing all those who wish to participate in India, against the British colonial empire, to do so in a variety of ways to accomplish a deeply moral cause. And, Gandhi's slogan when he did the Salt March was, "I want world sympathy in this battle of right against might." Why salt? Because everybody needs salt, no matter whether you're a Hindu or a Muslim, a man or a woman, old or young. Salt occurs freely in nature by the sea as rock salt. And of course, we know that the British government taxed salt, had a complete monopoly over the production and distribution of salt, which Gandhi questioned. He wrote to the Viceroy, he said, salt is the only commodity that poor people need more than the rich. So I appeal to you, Lord Irvin, who was the Viceroy, that you should repeal the tax on salt because it places a differential burden on the poorest of the poor. That was Gandhi's argument. Irvin said, go to hell, Mr. Gandhi. And Mr. Gandhi decided to go take a walk. And his walk was carefully charted, 240 miles. Over 10 million people walked, some with him, but many to other parts of India's coast. India has a coastline of 6,000 kilometers. There were millions of charkhas, spinning wheels that were spinning. There were thousands of prayer meetings. There were thousands of village leaders who were handing out their resignations. And most importantly, there were tens of thousands of kettles boiling seawater. And of course, as somebody said, that when Indians on the coast began to boil seawater in their kettles, it shook the foundations of this mighty British Empire, which we know the sun never set on Queen Victoria's empire. And like it was Indian tea in Boston Harbor, which led to the Boston Tea Party in this country, salt, again, a commodity that was taxed, created this campaign over time. It's almost like, well, where did he reach at the end of the first day? Where is he now? Is he going to make it? And, with daily newspaper feeds and newsreels, he's being debated in the British Parliament and in Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Parliament and Congress, asking, why is Mr. Gandhi walking? And, because the Britishers tax salt. So he generated a transmedia global campaign connecting each individual in India. And this is, of course, before the World Wide Web. Talk about a World Wide Web at that time. Okay, so much like Mr. Dickens and Harriet, Beecher, Stowe, and Uncle Tom's Cabin, and I don't think I mentioned this, but Uncle Tom's Cabin was also serialized. It was serialized over 40 episodes. And then, of course, you got the binge version when the book came out. And it's also important to point out that Uncle Tom became a slur. So much good as the book did in the long run, it also helped create a stigmatized term, a new language, but not such a new language. So anyway, so with my colleague, Helen Wong, I hope Helen is listening in. She's my guru. If Ev Rogers was my guru of the past, Helen is my guru of the present. With her, I've been working on a lot of transmedia projects. This particular one, we jointly led. Well, Helen led it. I held her bag. And this was a project out of Hollywood called East Los High. East Los High means East Los Angeles High School. And it was the story of young Latina or Latinx teenagers and a big but highly fragmented audience. And we decided, or the producers of the East Los High show decided that they would use transmedia. Why? Because 1 in 4 American adolescents are of Latin origin, 1 in 3 becomes pregnant as a teenager. And at the same time, while they have these problems which you're trying to address, they are 1.5 times more likely to watch videos online on their small screens. So this wonderful transmedia story world was created for them. And what you see is the website page, a screenshot of the website page. East Los High ran for 4 seasons, plus a finale between 2013 to 2017. The website had 25 clickable links. There was a web novella, so it was a serial that was broadcast season-wise on your small screen. And it had 9 digital extensions, the transmediated part. So an example would be the Siren. The Siren, as you can see on the top, is the East Los High School newspaper, which is an online newspaper. So you could watch East Los High, or you could just decide to click on the Siren and see what's happening. The most popular digital extension was Ask Polly, about sex and dating. So young people could ask Polly. Polly was a popular character. I mean, he was, you can say, very passionate, charmer, could, woo any woman. But Polly always used a condom. And so you could ask Polly if you had a question, and you can imagine there were a lot of young people asking. So that was another digital extension. You could learn new dance moves. You could learn new recipes. There were columns on fashion. There was a video log of one of the characters who became pregnant, who's now making difficult choices about what to do. And basically, it's a story world, coordinated over time, providing multiple entry points for the consumer who can participate, who can watch, who can post, who can text, who can dance, who can cook, and multiple points of entry. And most importantly, it had very deep and layered content, and you decided where you wish to go. We've got 4 peer-reviewed articles on East Los High. I'm very happy to post them. This research was funded by the Population Media Center. And thanks to Helen, our piece in the American Journal of Public Health was chosen by the editors out of several dozens of articles as the most outstanding article for 2017. I don't know if Anu is around, but if Anu Sachdev is around, she did a study of East Los High when she worked as a master's student at the University of Texas, El Paso, where I'm based. And so all this to show that for me, it's as deeply a personal journey as it is a professional one. And you see how the story continues in some ways. A report card on East Los High, and I'll wind up in 2 or 3 minutes. I'm looking at the time. It was the top-rated show on Hulu Latino, won Cannes Awards, 6 Emmy nominations, and Helen, who led the research, showed that the higher the transmedia participation, the higher was the engagement of the user, and stronger were the cognitive, affective, and behavioral effects. And 6 weeks after season 1 ended, and we basically studied season 1 in great depth, there were 31,000 visits to Planned Parenthood through the East Los High website, including 52% new visits. So it allows you, because with digital media, they leave a digital footprint in time. And so you have an idea of who's doing what from where. It's a little different than doing survey research in India for Hum Log. Lastly, I'll end with this initiative that I've been working with the Population Foundation of India, Poonam Muthureja, who's the executive director, and her team. It's funded by the Gates Foundation, UNFPA, and this is a serial called Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti Hoon. I, a woman, can achieve anything. It's already had 3 seasons between 2013 and 2019. 180 plus episodes, and as per certain calculations that were made, given it's a multimedia initiative broadcast out of community radio stations, the radio version on Vivid Bharati, on FM, and it has many other ancillary series like Sex Ki Adalat, Satya Ki Adalat, from reel to reel, and there are a whole host of components. It has an IVRS component, so as opposed to people writing letters, they can now call in a wonderful, they can now call in a line, a telephone line, and when you call this telephone line, it automatically disconnects you, because in India, we know the importance of the missed call, and then the computer dials you back. And then you can leave, you can take part in a quiz, you can give your impressions about the program. And Helen and I studied this. The 3 seasons together have had an unbelievable 2.1 million calls from viewers. And of these, about a third are unique calling numbers. So you're looking at about 600,000 to 700,000 people who've been calling in to Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti Hoon. Main kuch bhi kar sakti hu. I, a woman, can do anything, achieve anything. I can play soccer. I mean, these were certain new behaviors. Soccer is a gendered sport, level playing field, and you get the idea. Symbolic representations, creating possibilities which don't exist before. I especially want to give you a flavor of some of the markers that we have introduced. Working very closely with Firoz Abbas Khan, the creative genius behind Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti Hoon, who also produced Mughal-e-Azam on stage. Some of you may have seen it or known about it. We introduced this whole notion of mast pitara. So Panna, whom you see on the right, is a young Asha worker, the idea being that this Asha worker can talk to young people, and she brings, so there's a radio station within the TV set, and these are 2 very popular characters, Munna and Buaji, who are sort of hilarious, and so you use humor. You have Panna, the Asha worker, the health worker, who comes to the radio station, and she brings along this little box, and they ask her what is in the box, and she says it's mast pitara. Mast is like pleasurable, pitara is like a box, a pleasure box. And what does Panna have in this pleasure box? So on subsequent episodes, she brings out different things from this pitara, and this pitara really is a basket of contraceptive choices, right? But we have relabeled them, new language, mast pitara. So here's Panna's mast topi. You can call it pugga, chhatri, topi, raincoat, whatever. Here's her mast goli. You can see the branding. There was a character, Birju Pehelwan, who went through a vasectomy, which is in Hindi called nasbandi. So we call it mastbandi in this case. And we also want to pay a little attention to this little love story, and it's a soap opera after all, between Panna and Samir. And of course, there's another character, the main character, Sneha, who's in love with Arjun. And both these sets of characters, lovers, have a very lambi sagai. And lambi sagai means long engagement. And the idea, as part of the basket of contraceptive choices, is delaying marriage for a young girl. And also the notion of a lamba honeymoon, which means a long honeymoon, which basically means delaying the arrival of the first child. So these are some creative ways in which all this learning over all the years, Dickens, you may know, coined 247 new words. He contributed 247 new words to the English dictionary, like fluffy, or butterfingers. These were Dickens' contributions. Gandhiji contributed many words like Harijan, a recasting of Achut, Daridra Narayan, and he recast the notion of Swarajya, from Tilak's notion of home rule to Gandhi's notion of self-rule, control over yourself, which was important to nonviolence. So we see the value of these marked new language to create a discourse, to create a possibility that didn't exist before. Of course, there was a lot of social media, and I think I have some colleagues from Trivon, Sushmita, who's joined. So this whole notion of lambi sagai, hashtag long engagement, and she says, "Tum to mere khas sati ho aur hamesha rahoge." You are my special friend and always will be. And then, of course, the viewers are being added to tag and post, and you see a narrative engagement at multiple levels. In conclusion, we have come far, and of course, I consider myself as being part of this journey. Of course, hats off to our own Kabirs and Khusros and the Dickens and G.K. Chestertons and F. Rogers and all the communication theorists. And I think you all will take us further. So I will end here. This is the website, facebook.com/positivelyabundant.50. You're welcome to join the group, and may these conversations continue. Over to you, Kulveen.
Thank you, Professor Singhal. Now, Ms. Sneh Gupta will be taking our questions.
All right. And I'm deeply mindful of time because, maybe the participants can decide if they want to stay on, if they wish to. I'm here for you all, but, all right. That's a decision they can make. So go ahead, Sneh, I'm listening.
Yeah, good evening, sir. Thank you so much for this session. And I'm really flooded with questions from all the participants. I would like to post some of them right here in front of you. The first question is, when Jerkins back in 2007 described transmedia storytelling, he stressed on the distinctive and unique contribution of each media platform while narrating the same story. How do the storytellers maintain this peculiarity across multiple media platforms?
Okay, Sneh, why don't you ask me all the questions that you have? Not all, but at least some of them, because then at least you get a sense of what the questions are. And
right, I'm posing all the questions now.
Okay,
so the second question is, fairy tales were originally not as bright as we know today. The original fairy tales of Grimm's brother were rather dark and revolutionary. Do you think it is justified to change these stories? Next, since fiction always has a kernel of truth and memes today are a fiction of images, do you think these are descriptive history in writing? How far do you feel narrative building techniques are used by political PR professionals? Next is, COVID-19 has changed the way narratives use data, bringing data-led narratives into this big picture. What are your views about using data while writing stories? Another one, with major brands moving towards socially responsible content, how are transmedia storytelling help them with the content and narrative engagement? The next one is, how can one use narrative building to fight cognitive dissonance about various issues? For instance, your example on contraception.
Okay, Sneh, is that enough? Should I try to answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we'll take the next set of questions as time allows.
Oh, okay. So if time is to allow us, then I will have to give very short answers. And I really should give short answers because these are very good questions. We have to respect the questions.
Thank you, sir.
Oftentimes, when somebody asks a question, the answer is hidden in the questions. So how do we, be responsible as writers? How do we avoid, literature comes in all forms, and there's the good, the bad, the ugly, and the lovely. And so if one is a student or a scholar of narratives, the choices you're making, especially if you have the ink in your control, is what kind of narratives do you want to privilege? Clearly, the world loves violent narratives. And the world loves dark narratives. Sex and violence are very attuned to melodramatic treatment. So the choices have to be made, whether one is into entertainment degradation or entertainment education. What kind of stories we write. Are we just writing stories about the earthquakes and the plagues and the COVID-19s, or about George Floyd's, or are we writing stories about policemen who go to African-American neighborhoods, have been doing that as a way of positive policing for the last 20 years. I, in fact, follow one of them in North Little Rock, Arkansas, a person who, plays basketball with the kids, who jumps rope with the young girls, and so on and so forth. So clearly, one makes choices as a researcher, as a writer, and these choices are one of struggles. There are no easy choices. And what choices one makes will determine how this goes. And Jenkins and so on, absolutely. Each story in a transmedia narrative should be complete by itself. But then, supplement, complement, or extend the main storyline if there is one. In the case of East Los High, there was one on the web novella. You extend it in different directions. And the story is not repeated, and it's the wholesome story world which creates the conditions for people to have multiple entry points and multiple exit points. So this is an area which I think deserves greater attention. We don't know all the questions, especially given we live in a very fragmented world where the choices that a consumer makes become very critical. But hopefully, as I post these articles, maybe your curiosity will be quelled or maybe raised more. And I hope, as opposed to just answering the questions in black and white, we can use this forum to begin to talk about the possibilities or the new realities that are possible now. Okay, so that's sort of my summary answer. Stay tuned. We don't have all the answers. We do have some insights, and we'll provide them. Do you want to go with the second set?
So the next question is, just give me a second. The stories have more cognitively and emotionally engaging when presented in an auditory format. What's your take on it?
Okay, I mean, the different theories of different medium or different media. And, when you hear things in an auditory through your ears, you create visual imagery. Maybe McLuhan here is important. When you read print, there's a certain grammar, there's a certain flow. So the medium becomes the message in part. So yes, different medium or different media, even though they put me in it, in the medium or the media, they appeal to different sensibilities. And if you are non-literate, then of course, audio-visual, or we know the value of that.
So I've got another question which says, how far do you feel narrative building techniques are used by political PR professionals?
Yeah, of course. I mean, ultimately, you have to craft a story, right? And whether it is, Make America Great here in the US, and, the MAGA hats, and, let's close our borders and, keep the foreigners away. That's a story, that certain groups, and of course, and you probably know well what stories are crafted in India, whether it's Mera Bharat Mahan or, Sabka Saath or Sabka Vikas. Yes, absolutely. There has to be a coherent story in order for it to, touch people, because exercising your franchise, you're responding to a bunch of scripts, and the script that appeals to you is the one. Sometimes the script is, you get a blanket or you get a little booze, and that script becomes more important in deciding how you vote. So ultimately, it's a very democratic process. We should say this about the entertainment education strategy, that people are not told what you're to do. You are given options, you can see them, you can decide whether you want to do them or not. So ultimately, even with your franchise, your vote, you may hear different stories, but what you do with it is entirely up to you. But of course, it gets insidious when you have, the kind of autocrats that we have all around the world. I don't need to name them because we certainly have one in our country, in our White House. They appeal to a certain set of people. And I think that's the other important point, that there's a danger of a single story. As Chimananda Adichie tells us, every story is partial, every story is partisan, and hence every story is problematic. And the important thing is for us to understand it, which means that there's always room for other stories, for more stories. And the more we can have a deeper sense of what the other stories are, perhaps the decisions can be made accordingly. Data is quite useful in terms of how you craft a story. The data that I presented from Soul City was expressed in a narrative form, but data was telling us that men feel that they are in charge, that they are the ones who have to put the woman in the place by empirical numbers. As also, I told you a story about data, but clearly there are narratives that are crafted around data, and we should always question that, because again, every data narrative is partial and partisan. As this narrative of mine was deeply personal and partisan, and I decided what is it that I'm going to talk about. And that's also a constraint of the medium, gatekeeping, other demands that come into play.
Thank you for this question answer session. Now I would like the host to take over from here.
All right. Thank you, Sneh.
Thank you, sir.
Posing the questions.
Thank you, Sneh, and thank you, Professor Singhal, for being so graciously answering all the questions which have been posed by the participants. Now I request Dr. Sarvesh Tripathi, Senior Faculty at University School of Mass Communication, to propose a vote of thanks. Dr. Tripathi, please.
Thank you, Kulveer. Hello, sir.
Hello.
It is, sir, namaskar. And it is really, we are very thankful to you just for agreeing, for accepting our request, our invitation to appear in this lecture series. Actually, I have heard and I have seen a lot of your lectures online, and I find that it is always very mesmerizing. And we just, during your lecture, we just remain enraptured. And after that, there is so much learning that what to speak after it, we fail to understand almost. But anyway, sir, it is very, very enriching experience for us. And we could because we could easily relate. You have the anecdotes or the events or the visuals that you have taken from India. We could easily relate with it. Moreover, you have taken Charles Dickens. Personally, I feel that I have read Great Expectations, David Copperfield. So we could also relate all these things. Most of the literature that you have discussed, Chesterton, are very common. And as a student, we all read. So we can easily understand what you want to explain. And we also acknowledged your involvement in the development communication journey of India also. A lot of incidents, a lot of events you have explained. And whatever initiatives in the beginning were taken in India, you provided a support system with your Guru Everett M. Rogers. We have read his book, your book also. A lot of books we have read. That's why we know you very well. So, and one more thing that is very remarkable, that I have also worked on it up to a certain extent. Whenever there will be an opportunity to meet you, I will just show you. how one word becomes fever for the entire concept. This idea you have thrown before us, and we can utilize this idea. One word, just as Gandhi has given a lot of words, and all these words are a concept in itself. They are a story in itself. Yes, sir. So, and sir, moreover, there's more remarkable thing. We also got introduced to quite a novel idea of transmedia storytelling. So we shall keep learning from you consistently from time to time, sir, and we shall remain in contact with you. So again, we are very grateful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Dhanyawad.
बहुत शुक्रिया. Thank you, Sarvesh ji, and also Kulvein. And may this conversation continue. A good serial always ends by, wait for the next curry. So let these conversations continue. I invite you again to join the positively.abundant.50 collaborative. And these conversations can continue there. And I promise the next time I'm in Delhi, I was supposed to be there in March, 2 days before all flights were
Sure.
canceled. I'll surely look you all up. But a special invitation to students who are on this call: they should never feel that they cannot be in touch, or they should feel free to communicate. And that, I think, is the legacy, at least of my mentor, who was very open and supportive and receptive. So thank you, Kulvein. Thank you, Sarvesh, and thank you all the participants from all over the world. I wish I could have greeted each one of you in person, but please accept my namaste.
Thank you, Professor Singhal. And I remember in December when we were having this conversation that you will be coming to Delhi soon, and we were organizing a special lecture, a physical special lecture for our students.
Yeah, at that time we have talked and we have communicated with Professor Singhal, and he accepted that he will come.
Indeed.
Could not happen.
It will happen.
Here on this platform. Thank you so much, Professor Singhal. And what a finale, what a closing session we had for Mediamorphosis. 10 lecture series spread over 8 days, organized by University School of Mass Communication. A befitting finale indeed. Thank you, dear participants, for being so patient, for being very, very interactive. Every question answer session has been extremely engaging, and we've all learned a lot from each engagement. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you.